Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this new episode of Secrets of Leaders. And today I'm really excited to welcome a researcher, a teacher, Dr. Kingsley Ugwuanyi. Hello, Kingsley. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Jerome. The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here today, especially to talk about leadership. But two subjects that I really enjoy exploring, which was not a subject that I embraced in my childhood, but now being a French person from actually from Reunion Island, living in France and now in the UK and learning different languages, and I think it's really important to embrace this multilingualism, and that's your specialty. So you're a teacher and a researcher on multilingualism and also social linguistics. And but before talking about those subjects and the links that they have with leadership, can you tell us a bit more about you? Who are you?
All right. Thank you so much, Jerome. Thanks again. My name is Kingsley Ugwuanyi, and I'm a linguist. And what that means is that I'm interested in languages, in studying languages. But linguistics is such a broad discipline. So I focus on sociolinguistics and multilingualism. Multilingualism, in a sense, could be understood as a branch of sociolinguistics. That is, sociolinguistics is from social, society, and language. That is the interaction between language and society, how language shapes society, but also how society shapes language. So there's this mutual um, interaction between language and society, and such topics as language and identity, language attitudes, how the interaction between the languages that people speak in multicultural, multilinguistic environment. And one thing I would say about myself is that I'm Nigerian. All right. I'm a Nigerian. I've lived and worked and taught and researched in the UK for nearly 10 years now. But I grew up in Nigeria, which is highly multilingual. There are over 500 languages, about 527, 22, 20, over 420 languages, I'll just put it that way, spoken in Nigeria. All right. What that means is that sometimes you are driving and you drive just an hour away, and then you meet people who speak a completely different language. So yeah, growing up in this kind of context, can't help observing the way these languages shape who we are, and then these languages also interact with English. So well, yeah, this is what I am before I preempt your questions.
Well, thank you very much. And it's super interesting because indeed, when you start traveling, which was my case, for instance, you can see, yes, there's another language, but behind the language, there's a set of behaviors, of social codes, and little thing that you can't just apply from your culture to another culture. You need to adapt as well by understanding what's going on. And yes, I would like to start with this, especially with the term social linguistics, because you said, yes, it's how languages impact the society. And I think as a leader, it's super important to understand this because, especially when you're leading a diverse team with different languages and different cultures. So, how a language would impact a society, and why is it super important for leaders to understand that and to integrate that into their leadership styles?
All right. Thank you so much for that perspective. Yes, it is absolutely important. I think I'll start by saying that language is culture and culture is language. All right. And what do I mean by that? It is not possible to think about culture without language. You can if I give an example, maybe with Japan, right? You can't think of Japanese culture outside of Japanese. You can't think of Japanese as a language and put Japanese culture away, right? I just use that example. So as a leader leading a diverse team, and by the way, diversity has become the norm of our world today. In a globalized society, diversity has become the norm, right? Think of any context, business context, work context, education context. It's about diversity. Monoculturalism is being phased away by globalization because people travel more, people move, migration has become the order of the day. So our world is increasingly becoming more diverse, right? So, and that diversity is one thing. When we think about diversity is cultural diversity. All right. We think about when we move to a different culture, we always talk about cultural shock, right? And all of that. But then one thing we have to notice it also is language. As a leader, you can't say you are culturally inclusive or culturally sensitive. You have a team that is culturally diverse and we think of people from all our cultures without acknowledging linguistic diversity immediately, because these things feed into the other. They are all connected. All right. You can't say you value my culture as my Nigerian culture, and you value my perspective, and then you don't value my language. And even when I say my language, it includes also my English. All right, because
Mm.
my background is world Englishes. All right, my PhD was on Nigerian English. Right, I've conducted several studies on variation even within English. So of course, you have French background, right? We all live in the UK, but we don't speak English the same way, isn't it? And the way I speak English is part of my identity, it's part of who I am. So what constitutes the diversity of your team as a leader is not just the cultural perspectives we bring. Even if you look at it, part of those cultural perspectives we bring is the language, is all of the languages I speak. I speak three languages. I speak Igbo, which is my L1, my first language. I speak Niger, which is a pidgin variety spoken in Nigeria. I also speak English, isn't it? So all of these languages form who I am. All right.
Mm.
So if you are going to acknowledge and appreciate the cultural the cultural asset I bring into your team, all right, these linguistic repertoires are also part of this cultural aspect, including very specifically, and I'm repeating that for a purpose, my English, my accent. So if you expect me as a leader, maybe because I mean we live here in the UK, isn't it? And then we have a team led by someone who speaks British English as their first language and expects me to my accent to be British. All right.
Mm.
Right? That is not leadership. Part of what makes you a leader who is leading a culturally diverse team is your ability to acknowledge. It's about mental shift first. Acknowledge first that different people have different cultures, and these different cultures come with different languages. All right. Even when everybody in your team speaks English, that English is not one, English is not monolithic, it's not singular, English is plural. And the plurality of English, one example of the plurality of English is our accents. But beyond people's different accents, we can also talk about other linguistic elements that constitute um, my English as different from your English. But what is important is understanding as a team, as a culturally diverse team, are we able to pursue the same goal and achieve a common understanding? If that is achieved, then the language and the accent and the way people speak should be acknowledged. I think this is one reality, one perception that leaders must take into consideration in order to lead effectively a diverse team.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I have so many questions. I actually have three specific questions after what you said. But the first one would be how leaders can be better at acknowledging this diversity, whether it is through different languages or through different accents?
I think it's like I said, it's about recognizing the need for this. If I am in a team where my identity, including my linguistic identity, is valued, all right, I feel valued as a person. All
Mm.
right. Then,
Mm.
if I'm in a team where my linguistic identity is not valued, my personality is also threatened. So it's about awareness, recognition, and
And not trying to correct the accent, right? Because I said that because I'm from Reunion Island, which is an island, a French island, but in Indian Ocean. With and my first language is not French; it's Creole. Like the Reunion is Creole. So this first language led me to have an accent. So Reunionese people have an accent when they speak French,
yeah,
and I think unconsciously, when I arrived in France, people started to make fun of my accent or try to correct my accent, and then my accent, in a way, started to be diluted so that I fit more into the motherland of France.
yeah,
And so that's why I asked this question. Do you think that also one of the worst way to handle
exactly.
multiculturalism or languages and accent is because in France, I think we have this issue really that my wife is British, and she obviously has a British accent when she speaks French, and people tend to downgrade actually her language skills because of that. And I think that's part of the issues that needs to be tackled, I guess.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, I think you've just framed it clearly. When you correct people directly, it puts people down, right?
Mm.
And even when you do that, sometimes people don't correct directly, all right, because they want to trying to save face. They do it indirectly and use innuendos and insinuations. But then in the end, people still get this, all right.
Mm.
So that is one. But again, I want to take on one of the things you said, which is a very common statement in society that someone has an accent. What does that
Yeah.
mean? All
Yeah.
right, this is one something we deal with as linguists. Everybody has an accent. What does accent mean? Accent is the way you speak a language. That's all. So everybody has an accent. Only someone who is impaired, maybe someone who doesn't speak, doesn't have accent. Everyone who can open their mouth and speak has accent. But what happens in our society is that certain accents have been imbued with certain social values. All right. But these things are socially constructed. There is nothing, there's nothing inherently. For example, if you come to the UK, I live in Newcastle upon Tyne, actually, even though I work in London. So I just commute to London, right? But then Newcastle English, which is called the Geordie English, the Geordie accent, is one of the regional varieties of English or accents of English that is highly, highly discriminated against. All right. Why is this the case? There is nothing inherent in Geordie accent that makes it inferior. There's
Mm.
nothing inherent in London area accent that makes it superior. Nothing. It's about power. It's about where the source of power is. And this is what I usually tell my students, that if by one miraculous turn of events, the seat of government, the seat of political and economic power of the UK, of England, moves to Newcastle, after after a century or some centuries, you will see that this accent that is now being negatively valued, right, will become positively valued, because that is the people who speak this accent, the people who have the money, and people who have the political power, people who have the educational power. So it's about power. So when we say people have accent, that is already discrimination. All right,
Mm.
because everybody has accent where it puts people down. And as leaders, this is something we should never say. A leader who is leading a diverse, whether or not you're leading a diverse team, right, we shouldn't say that people have accent. It is already a discriminatory statement, because everybody, if by saying this person has accent, you're actually saying I don't have accent. That's
Mm.
what you are implying. But in
Mm-hmm.
reality, everybody has accent. My accent and your accent can be the same. Even people, two individuals born around the same time in the same area, growing up this, because they have different experiences, travels, their social network, the kind of people they relate with, their accent, two people's accent cannot be exactly the same thing. All right. So it is very important that every accent is valued in every team, and that makes for leadership. When people feel valued, you see their best in
Mm.
teams. I don't know if I've addressed. So
Yes, yes, and it really does make sense. And you said a word that really resonate with me. You said this about power. So okay, who has the power and will be perceived to have a language as a tool of power. That oh, I can talk this way, it mean that I have more power.
yeah,
And in a way, in my culture, I think I can see that also in Reunion Island when people who struggle to speak good French, as we've been told in school, they will
yeah,
be perceived as less skilled or less intelligent than the people who will be talking French in a more academic way.
yeah,
And that leads me to also to the question of patois, creoles, languages, because there's a big debate as well that, Rini Creole is not really a language because it was not written. So what makes a language? What makes a patois? What makes a creole? And how do we navigate through this as a leader?
yeah. I think part of what is happening is that many people do not have the right knowledge about how languages evolve. If you study just little of historical linguistics, so that's the evolution of language, how languages evolve, you see you will be less discriminatory of languages, right? I read this book. This book written by, I can't remember the name of the author now, but the title of this book is The History of Linguistic Aggravation. All right, I can send it to you. It's an interesting book. If you read it, it will change a lot. All right, it's written by the first individual to finish reading the whole Oxford English Dictionary. All right, he's an American, and he sat down and read it. I mean, not all these abridged dictionaries we buy on bookshelves, but the full unabridged Oxford English Dictionary is about in 2 or 3 volumes. It's quite big,
Yeah.
and he's the first individual in the world to finish it. And then he wrote the first book about his experience of reading the entire dictionary. And then he wrote this second book where he did a very interesting analysis of how some English words evolved over the years. And the history of language is the history of linguistic discrimination. All right. Okay. Now, one of the words I usually remember as an example is the word belittle. Belittle, which is to make something less of value or to make something
Mm.
look little, right? It's a word we all use today, right? And everybody thinks that's fine, right? But around the 18th century, late 17th century, 18th century, that was when this word started coming into English gradually. All right. And when it started coming, a lot of linguists, a lot of people say, no, belittle cannot be. Remember, it's coming from the word little, which is an adjective. All right. Belittle is a verb. All right. You're just adding be to it. People say, no, you can't form verbs this way. This word can't be an English word. In
Mm.
fact, there are several ways he analyzed this way and brought people's comment in newspapers, on TV, saying that people who speak this way should be banned from society. All right, but that is how the word started its journey. But today, all of those discrimination is lost. All right, this word is now seen as saintly, so to speak, isn't it?
Mm.
So the history of I just use that example to drop back to what you said about patois, creoles. Um, the history of language, I want to repeat myself, is the history of discrimination. And again, why are some languages described as inferior, like patois? I told you one of the languages I speak is Niger, which is Nigerian Pidgin. It's an English-based Creole, an English-based Pidgin, and because it has a lot of English words, so many people till today still see it as bad English or corrupted English. Some people even call it broken English. All right, and these are all the innuendos and ideologies that I used to describe this. And if you look at even the history of English itself, the English, British, let's take British English as an example. Of course, English is not even originally a British language. English is originally a Germanic language, all right? It was
And a
around.
mix with French as well since William the Conqueror, right? And
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So, for example, there was English came from Germany, the Anglo-Saxons that all right that invaded the Celtic nation that originally inhabited this place, right? And then the language started mixing, started forming, started. But if you go back to 5th century, and you will see that the kind of language started evolving when two languages mix. All right, sometimes new languages evolve from this. All right, and then that traces back to around 11th century, 1066, when William the Conqueror conquered the British, and then French came. From that late 11th century to about 13th or 14th century, French was the language of the upper class in England, all right, and English, as it were, was language of the poor, so to speak. It was very negatively valued in the UK. So, but then after some centuries, there became some kind of cultural awareness and some kind of renaissance, cultural reawakening. Let's value away with French and all of that. Okay, then English began to resurface and began to be valued again. So this is how languages move, and it's about cultural awareness. It's about political movements. It's about migration. So when a language we see as Creole or as patois, as inferior today, can become superior tomorrow. It's about historical movement. And I've just given an example with English, how if we go further back into English, we see how English that is globally respected, or British English that is globally respected today, was once minoritized, was once language of the poor, was once negatively valued. But then, because when it began to be positively valued, British Empire became so strong globally, and they started pushing to other parts of the world. You see that these things began to acquire positive value. So it's about that. It's about those who speak patois and creoles today are put down because of also they do not have the power. One, if they acquire the power, their language will be valued. Yeah.
Super interesting. I think it really explains also the power dynamic and also the role of a leader to be more inclusive by having this knowledge and this awareness. And to your experience, how what are the benefits of including this into our leadership style, saying, okay, we put an effort to be more aware and to value more the language diversity of my team? What would be the benefits for the team to have that kind of leadership?
The first benefit I would say links back to what I said earlier on. As the individuals working in your team will feel valued.
Mm,
And when people feel valued, they give you more. Their performance increases. If
mm,
I'm in a team where I don't feel, these people, they don't regard me, all right, it will affect my input, and which is going to affect the entirety of the team. So that is very important. And people would be more open to you. Your team members will be more open to you because they see you as a fellow, so to speak, as a colleague who values them. I think that for me, that is the greatest advantage of valuing cultural and linguistic diversity in your team.
mm. And I would say as well, that's not from an academic background, but that's more empirical from my perspective and the way because I work with lots of different nationalities and different languages. I think it increases massively also critical thinking, because when you have someone in the team that speak maybe in English for work, but also have a different background, you see, oh, but if you say it this way, this culture may perceive it a different way. So I think it really increases critical thinking, but also creativity. And I don't know if that's something also you've been able to observe in your research.
Absolutely. And research does. I mean, there are several studies to even support those positions. And Studies have also told us that multilingualism, that's for those who speak more languages, have sharper cognitive abilities.
That's true.
All
Yeah.
right, because the more languages you have, the more these languages interact in your mind and make your cognition even sharper. There are studies upon studies that show that children who speak several languages tend to perform higher and exhibit higher cognition, and these things are important, extremely important, even when we come to problem solving in teams, because our languages shape the way we think, right? All
Mm.
right. The kind of languages we speak also shape the way we think and the way we see life and our perspective and perceptions of things. So if you have people in your team as a leader who speak different languages, what it means is that you have people who think differently, who approach problems from a wide range of angles, and that will enrich your team. And one of the things a leader could do is to allow people with diverse cultural and linguistic background lead team projects. For example, when someone who speaks Japanese leads, I don't know why I'm giving a lot of example with Japanese today, but that's fine.
It talks to me. This is a language I've been learning in for a year now. So
Oh, really? I didn't know. When someone who speaks Japanese is leading a team project, and they bring their cultural linguistic
yeah,
perspective to that project. Another time, bring someone from Nigerian background, from someone from French background, from Jamaican or Indian or any kind of background, and you will see that you are actually gaining the most from these people. Different perspectives will make teamwork even better. So yeah, I completely, and it also connects to our creativity
mm,
and criticality as well. So completely
mm.
agree with your viewpoints.
Yeah, and definitely the cognitive as well, because yeah, it's such a complex thing to do for the brain to assimilate a language, but linking with other languages. And for instance, I'm learning Japanese through English, which is not my mother tongue. So I think that that way also is quite interesting, that to train your brain. And but yes,
Yeah,
it's super fascinating, and we can understand the benefits, but I can still feel that some people, some leaders, some team leaders still are reluctant to be into that dynamic. I can see there's still some obstacle or breaks on. Um, what people tend to fear in this situation? What are those obstacles, and how can we remove them in a way?
yeah. Well, I think one fear that most people have is that people think that multilingualism is a problem. As if you have a team where everybody speaks different languages, it will be chaos. All right.
Mm,
Now it's not chaos. If you think about a team, if you think about United Nations, for example, or any international organization, there is something called working language. All right. In every team, it's important. That's one pragmatic decision, right? We have to make. That's a compromise. So if you have a team of 6 people, where 6 of them all speak different languages, if there is no central language in which everybody can communicate and relate, then there will be trouble. We are humans, and this is the reality of our world, right? So, but in all of those, what we are saying that even though we have a working language in a team, right? Now, that does not mean that all the other linguistic components of these individuals should be completely ignored. All right. No, it shouldn't. So, for example, if we have a team of 6, and one of the things we could do is to maybe leaders could do is to acknowledge, maybe even learn hello in everybody's language. It as tokenistic as that might be, as that might look, it is really of value. I would appreciate if I come into a board meeting and my board leader says Ibolachi, all right, which is good morning in my first language, all right. That alone means a lot to me as an individual. Sounds tokenistic, but it's something of value. Learn, and even have leaders can have maybe welcome or some kind of posters around the office, in welcome or hello, whatever, in different languages. If I come into an office and I see and I see in a language, I see some kind of pictures around, and I see my language there. I feel belonged already, even before anything happens. All right, and these are the things that leaders can do, and to realize that multilingualism, if we convince ourselves that multilingualism is not a problem, but is an asset, because our world is increasingly becoming multilingual. All right. Think of what is happening in China, for example. Right. There are more speakers of English in China there are in the UK. Okay.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What is the whole population of the UK? Less than 70 million, isn't it? But
Yes.
there are hundreds of millions of speakers of English, because many people are learning English because China wants to connect to the world, isn't it? And what does that make us less humans? Does that make people less Chinese, or does that make English less English? The answer is no. The answer is that we can be more multilingual and be more accommodating, and we have a lot. We've learned a lot from China. We talk about acupuncture, we talk about Chinese traditional medicine, we talk about all of this. There's a lot, and these things are all embedded in the language. Chinese is now taught in several secondary schools in the UK. This wasn't the case 50, 70 years ago. Why? It's about China coming up as well. It's about the world becoming more multilingual. And once we realize this, once we learn that this is not a problem, then leaders will liberate their mind and will be able to be more accommodating. Now we accommodate cultures, all right. We accommodate different races, so to speak. Even though racism is still there, by the way, but the world is becoming more receptive. I would put it that way. So this reception, this accommodation that comes with globalization, should also include language. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful message, and yes, that I think the world itself, not just corporation, not just leaders, but the world will be so much more fluid, and the connection will be so much more deeper as well, if we include this. It's fascinating. I could go on for much longer, but I still want to ask a more personal question this time. But and what I like to ask for every guest that I have on the podcast is, do you have in memory a specific challenging leadership situation that you had to face, and how did you do it?
All right, this is interesting. Right, it's there's this group, all right, I lead. It's a very informal group. We have a WhatsApp group, right? And it's a group of linguists. So we are just people have thought, because I was teaching in Nigeria. I taught in Nigeria for some years before I moved to the UK. Well, my mentees, my colleagues, academic friends and colleagues from across Nigeria, now across the world. Many people have traveled to different countries. So all right, so we are all Africans. We don't all speak the same language. We don't all have the same L1. We are linguists. We all have this consciousness about how we should promote our language. And then often, most times, I want to speak my L1. There are many people in the group who can understand my L1, but there are also people who in the group who cannot understand my L1. So most times when we meet, all right, sometimes we meet online to talk, or we meet over WhatsApp call, right? We speak English, all right. And then sometimes you have your L1 come in, and then you have to interpret, because you have to also realize that not everybody. So when I find myself in this dilemma, right, it's a very big dilemma. All right, we need to promote. They need to promote these other languages, but then they need the pragmatic need to be sure that everybody in the group, in the team, is carried along. So balancing this, well, not banning every other person's language, but encouraging people to speak even in their language when they want to speak, but summarize whatever you say so that other people can understand what you have said. But creating that space where everybody feels confident and feels okay to speak in any language of their choice is one leadership. Because I'm leading this group, but it's one leadership decision I've had to make that's very, very complex. Not having solved it, but it's an ongoing challenge. I would put it that way.
I can imagine. Well, thank you so much for sharing this as well. And thank you very much for all this wisdom and all these very pragmatical as well messages, because it's not just a theory, it's not just a concept, it's also something that we can activate in our daily life since today. Do you have like another conclusion or word to share with us before we end this interview?
All right, just a quick one. I remember, I mean, we're in the UK, so I use an example of the UK, and there's this Equality Act 2010, very popular equality about the things that we should not discriminate against. So if people discriminate against someone because of their gender or because of their
Ethnicity
nationality
or
or
religion?
ethnicity. There are about nine. They are called nine protected characteristics, right? And we have age, disability, gender, reassignment, marriage, pregnancy, race, religion, sexual orientation, and then also sex, right? But language is not there. But one thing that is very central we're missing is that most times these when discrimination against people comes in all of this, it comes in language. It comes in how people say these things, right? So it is a surprising omission, right? When I think number one in this list of protected characteristics should be language. When people say, I can't hire this person because of the way they speak English. I can't hire this because of their accent. All right. And these things, the linguistic discrimination has real life impact. And I can mention studies upon studies. There are many of them conducted in the US where people who are looking to rent a house, right? You just call a landlord or a house renting agency with a AAV. AAV is African American Vernacular English accent. The same individual says accent, calls a landlord and say, I've seen your advert, you have a 3-bed flat, I want to rent. And the landlord says, I don't have flat to rent to you. And then the same individual calls 10 minutes later, changes the accent to speak some kind of standard American English and say, yeah, I have. The landlord says, yes, I have. You can come over in the evening to view the house. And this is just one example. There are several studies you can find about this. Is just one example that linguistic discrimination has real life impact. People can lose opportunities, people can lose jobs, people can lose life opportunities because someone doesn't like the way they speak, doesn't like their accent. So as leaders, we have to recognize the real life impact of linguistic discrimination and then endeavor that we fight. People are not less intelligent because they speak Geordie English or they speak English with a Nigerian accent. The brightest of people can speak English with any kind of accent. And as leaders, we have to just recognize that this is a problem and then contribute to fighting it. I think that would be a good way to end.
That is definitely a great way to end. Thank you very much. That was fascinating. And for the people who want to know more about your work, we put also more information under the video with your papers and also your LinkedIn profile as well, if people want to connect to you. So thank you very much, Kingsley. That was
Thank you.
fascinating.
All
And
right.
talk
The
to you
pleasure
soon.
is mine. Thank you so much for inviting me, Jeremiah. I think I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.